Oh hi. Mauritania, the state in the Western Africa, is washed from the west by the Atlantic Ocean. Borders on Western Sahara in the northwest, on Senegal in the southwest, on Algeria in the northeast, from Mali in the south and the east. The toponym Mauritania goes back to the 3 millennium BC. When Phoenician seafarers gave Africa lying in the extreme west to the territory the name Muharrem, Western Edge. During the colonial period the name Mauritania was carried by one of territories of the French Western Africa which in 1960 declared independence under the same name. For several thousands of years the southern part of modern Mauritania was populated with the people of Negroid race which were engaged in hunting and agriculture. In the millennium gradual settling of the country by the nomadic Berbers cattle farmers who were pushing aside blacks to the south began with the north. Berbers formed confederation of the tribes of Sankadi. In the 9th-16th centuries a part of the southern Mauritania entered the empires of Ghana, Mali and Gao created by the Nigero-Congolese people. These states had high culture, their economy was based on agriculture, trade and gold mining. But gradually they fell into decay under the pressure of the Arab and Berber tribes. Since the 11th century the Arabization and Islamization of the population began. Arabs reached an ascendant position in the country, having established the power over Berbers and blacks. Nationalities a Tukular, a Seninka Wolof. Berbers and blacks adopted language and family way from Arabs. Shinjeti's oasis became the main center of the country, and the country began to be called Tarbel Biden, the Earth White. In the 11th century in the territory of Mauritania the political formation of theocratic character headed by the leader of the Berber tribe of Alamtuna Abu Bakr ibn Amar arose. After 20 years Jihad Abu Bakr's empire stretched from Senegal to the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. The ruling dynasty in the state received Al-Mouravida's name. Yusuf ibn Tashfin, whose activity led to invasion to the Iberian Peninsula, became Abu Bakr's successor. By the end of the 11th century the empire of Al-Mouravidah stretched already from the river Senegal in the south to the Ebro River in Spain in the north. Al-Mouravid and the Canary Islands also belonged. In the 14th century the ascendant position among Berber tribes was reached by the Arab tribe of Bath Hassan. Those tribes which helped Bath Hassan with their wars reached the position equal to the Arab military clans. Those someone didn't show resistance became Marabutsi tribes. That is the peaceful tribes which don't have the right to carry arms. Shown resistance received the status of tributaries, Zenek. As a result in Mauritania there was a difficult hierarchy of clans where Arabs of Hassana were on the top, Berbers soldiers followed further, then peace Berbers Marabuti, then Berbers tributaries and, at last, the blacks. Slaves and Haratini freedmen. Subdued still by Berbers. Besides, in social structure of Mauritania separate castes on occupation characteristics were created. These are singers and musicians. Grioto. Handicraftsmen, hunters. Not Moscow Administrative Road Inspectorate. Fishers. At the end of the beginning of the 18th century the Emirates of Trarza, Brakna, Tigant, Adrar were formed. Development by the French of the valley of the river Senegal, the southern border of modern Mauritania, began with the middle of the 19th century. In 1904, the area to the north of the river Senegal was proclaimed the French possession, the civil territory of Mauritania. Conquest of Mauritania was a process, long and difficult for colonialists. Only in 1920 France officially announced Mauritania the colony as a part of the French Western Africa, and only during operations 1934-1936 the French could establish direct overland link through Mauritania between the southern and northern Désegènes, that is, establish the actual control over all territory of the country. In 1946 Mauritania received the status of the overseas territory of France, and in 1958, the status of the Autonomous Republic of the French Community. On November 28, 1960 the country gained independence of France. The Islamic Republic of Mauritania was proclaimed. Since August 1961 Mokhtar Ould Daddah began to rule the country. The state and the government were headed by the president. The unicameral National Assembly was created. The constitution adopted in 1965 installed a one-party system. And only in the country the Party of the Mauritian People, PMPEP, became ruling. It is created in 1961. From the very beginning the neogenic state had difficult relationship with Morocco, to which Mauritania competed for the territory of Western Sahara. Inclusion of Mauritania Index of the Union in 1961 became possible as a result of the diplomatic transaction. In exchange for inclusion of Mongolia, which was supported by the USSR. In 1964 diplomatic relations with the USSR were established. To the middle of the 1970 years there were significant changes in domestic policy and relationship of Mauritania with some states of Maghreb as a result of her accession in 1975 to military operations on side of Morocco and groups of the Polisario Front fighting for liberation of Western Sahara. The matter is that still in the mid-60s Morocco and Mauritania, referring to historical, geographical, ethnic and other factors, officially made the territorial complaint for Western Sahara in the Union, at the same time challenging the rights of each other for this territory. The prolonged period of fighting exhausted national economy. The ends of war it wasn't visible. The Polisario Front concentrated the blows first of all against Mauritania. The irons were Ottomans, and the railroad by which ore is delivered to the port of Nouadhibou Hibu became constant objects of fighting in the north of the country. Fighters of the Polisario Front by all-terrain vehicles reached Atar and even attacked the capital of Nouakchott twice, in 1976 and in 1977. Military expenses and economic losses from combat operations in a zone of iron ore developments were a heavy burden for Mauritania. Receipts from export of iron and copper ores were reduced, import of food increased, inflation grew at the menacing rates, the financial position sharply worsened. On July 10, 1978 the group of officers headed by the Colonel Mustafa Ould Salah ordering Army of Mauritania made a revolution, having overthrown and having arrested Ould Daddah. The constitution was suspended, the government, parliament, PN, youth and other public organizations are dismissed. The new government is created. The Military Committee of National Revival, MACUR, became the supreme legislative body of the country for 13 years. Mustafa Ould Salah became its first head. The head of the new mode showed of the address to the people that transition of the power is exclusively internal affair of Mauritania, and that it is caused by decline in economy, finance, political and public life, corruption. The constitutional charter, which is some kind of program of the new mode, was adopted. The military authority set 3 objects for itself: to stop the war in Western Sahara, to correct economy, and to establish genuine democracy. In response to it, the Polisario Front declared on July 12, 1978 the unilateral termination of military operations against Mauritian troops. The Mauritian leaders paid the main attention to the solution of acute internal political and social and economic issues. The largest problem was the drought lasting more than 5 years. Because of how the whole country turned into a disaster zone. And even in the south, where at coast of the river Senegal cattle breeders from the north found a shelter for the cattle, approach of the desert began. Almost all livestock of the cattle was threatened by death. Constantly reduced production of agricultural products for only 1 year decreased by 1%. The drought, besides, accelerated process of social changes to which the country wasn't ready. Massachusetts outflow of country people to the cities began. In these conditions it was necessary to take drastic measures to provide migrants with work, food, etc. However, Vivendi was divided into moderate politicians and supporters of carrying out radical reforms. Among paramount tasks before Vivendi, especially sharply, there were tasks of strengthening of the economy undermined by war, elimination of food crisis, suspension of impetuous increase in prices and inflation of national currency. The country leaders were forced to address the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, and also the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for consultation on improvement of economy. As a result, the 2-year-old extraordinary plan of national revival, based on tough budget planning, more rational investment of the capitals mainly in development of agriculture and sea industrial fishing, was entered. For attraction of the foreign capital and stimulation of private Mauritian business in 1979, new, more preferential code of investments was adopted. The aspiration to undertake fund effective economic and social reform support among dicks of Vivendi, a management of industrial trade unions and the national professional center in the country. The internal political situation in the country remained intense. The economy was undermined by war, a long drought, adverse conditions in the world market on iron and copper ore. For elimination of a crisis situation in economy, the new mode was forced to adopt in September 1978 according to the recommendation of IBRD, the so-called Program of National Economic Revival, providing improvement of finance, the accelerated development of agriculture, or mining industry, sea fishery. However, in view of the shortage of financial means, implementation of this program, calculated generally on receiving the foreign economic help, met serious difficulties. For attraction to the country of the additional capitals, the Mauritian leaders adopted the new code of investment stimulating private business. At the same time, because of the continuing drought, the question of supply of the population with food extremely became aggravated. Speculation amplified, jumped up prices for goods of prime necessity. Over the country the wave of strikes swept. Along with it, there was no unity in ranks of Vivendi on a problem of Western Sahara. In ruling military junta, two groups, pro-Moroccan and pro-Saharan, were formed. On April 3, 1979, the Colonel Ould Salah was overthrown by Lieutenant Colonels Ould Busy, who held the Prime Minister's post, Ould Luli and Ould Haidala. As a result of reorganization of governing bodies of the country, instead of Vivendi, the Military Committee of National Rescue, McCur, is created. Its head proclaimed the Colonel Mohammed Mahmoud Ould Ahmad Luli, the former Minister of Affairs of Government Employees and Training. All civilians were brought from structure of VNENS. On April 24, 1979, Mauritania announced severance of diplomatic relations with Egypt. Diplomatic relations of Mauritania with Algeria were restored, bilateral cooperation with Libya, Iraq and some other countries is set up. Military cooperation with France was resumed. On May 27, 1979, the Colonel Ould Busy died in plane crash. The plane with the state delegation of Mauritania got to a sandstorm near Dakar and I fell to the ocean. The country leaders entered negotiations with the Polisario Front and on August 5, 1979 signed with him the agreement according to which Mauritania refused claims to Western Sahara and I took a neutral position on a West Saharan problem. On August 21, Mauritania denounced the contract on joint defense with Morocco. By December 1979, from the territory of Mauritania, the contingent of the Moroccan troops, 9,000 people, was brought. In January 1980, Ould Luli was displaced from the post. The Colonel Ould Haidala became the head of VNENS. In July 1980, Vivendi forbade slavery. Mauritania was the last country of the world where slavery was officially allowed. By this time in the country, according to the American magazine Newsweek of May 6, 1985, there were over 100,000 slaves and about 300,000 people who were the former slaves. Most of city dwellers released the slaves, but in rural areas this process lasted long, still very much. In view of terrible poverty of the country, the relation between the owner and his slave can be favorable to both. Is the representative of society on fight against slavery A? Whitaker said, from the economic point of view, the owner and his slave a little in what differ from each other, as both that and another live in misery. In December 1980, the civil government under the leadership of Ahmad Ould Bedzara was created. However, as a result of the attempt of a coup made in March 1981 by the armed groups which arrived from abroad under command of two former dicks of VNENS which were in emigration, military regime put an end to civilian rule. The Lieutenant Colonel Mauya Ould Sidi Ahmed Taya in April 1981 created the new military government. In the country, the policy of strict economy was introduced, fight against corruption and plunders is proclaimed. In August 1981, VNENS proclaimed creation of bodies of education of masses for fight against alien groups. The youth went for socially useful works. As to finish various undertakings undertaken for the purpose of restoration of normal political life, it wasn't possible. In August 1981, VNENS proclaimed creation of bodies of education of the masses, designed to promote involvement of the Mauritian people in national construction and its preparation for effective and responsible participation in political life of the country, and also for fight against alien groups. The youth went for socially useful works. Structures of education of masses were formed by cells of a certain number of the next families and represented a rudiment of public life. This system, created in November 1981, was designed to help the population of the country to find a place in state, but not in breeding structure. The Charter of Structures defined that any individual activity or activity of the organizations which are based on the racial, breeding or regional principles was forbidden. Promotion of ideologies of individuals or the foreign states was similarly forbidden. To each citizen it was imputed a duty to realize the course conducted by the national country leaders. The support on masses was necessary for the mode for overcoming social and economic difficulties which continued to increase. In the industry, the stagnation caused by unprofitability of the enterprises, the shortage of shots was observed. Demand for Mauritian iron ore fell, that resulted in deficit of the balance of payments of the country. The public debt grew. The difficult situation developed in agriculture. Over 80% of the general needs of the population for the main food were satisfied due to import. Unemployment increased, the living standards of workers sharply decreased, migration from the village to the cities amplified. In a number of regions of the country, workers and employees striked. For stabilization of an internal political situation, the mode went for some improvement of the situation of citizens. The salary to some categories of low-paid workers was raised, and in public sector it was balanced with salary in the private sector. Free of charge, the food received by Mauritania from abroad as urgent food aid were distributed poor. Reform of state administrative facilities was undertaken. However, all these measures had palliative character. Ruling regime had to consider also existence in the country of the banned oppositional groups, putting pressure upon them. On the one hand, traditionalists and adherents of the pro-Arab orientation, with another, black activists of Al-Qur nationalist movement and Union for Democratic Mauritania, the pro-Moroccan organization involved in attempt of a coup of 1981. However, the most serious problem which the Mauritian leaders faced was the lack of unity among Dix of Venans in a question of their relation to the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. Sadr. Some supported, others mined. The neutrality policy pursued concerning Sadr by the Mauritian government caused deterioration in a relationship with Morocco, which even more often accused Mauritania that it forms rear base to Saharan forces. The Mauritian leaders tried to maintain balance between about Saharan and about the Moroccan groups. In February 1984, Old Haydala insisted on official recognition of Sadr that caused discontent in ruling numbers of the country. In particular, the Prime Minister Old Taya said that he doesn't approve such actions of Old Haydala concerning Sadr. At the beginning of March, the President displaced Old Tayu from the Prime Minister's post, having appointed him the Chief of the General Staff. Samshai Old Haydala concentrated in the hands all power in the country. Presidential posts, head of the government and Minister of National Defense. In the government, signs of the accruing crisis were more and more shown. In recent months, Old Haydala's stay in power, all economic and social difficulties of the country acted into the forefront. Despite new policy of Mauritania in the field of fishery, practically nothing was made, for example, for establishment of national control over this important industry of national economy, which at due management could give more export receipts than extraction of iron ore. The extraordinary scope was reached by corruption. So, some Mauritian businessmen and officials in conspiracy with influential foreign groups actively participated in plunder of sea richness of the country. The scandals connected with corruption broke out also in other industries. In December 1984, the Colonel Old Taya overthrew the Colonel Old Haydala and headed the Military Committee of National Rescue of the country. The main task of Venance proclaimed restoration of trust to the state institutes and ensuring social justice in the country. For a rather short period, Mauritania turned from the small little-known country with prevalence of the nomadic population, with a limited economic basis and low social indicators, into the country with quickly growing urban population, a market relationship and sustained economic growth. New fields of metals, rich deposits of oil, about 1 billion barrels, and gas, about 30 billion cubic meters, were found in the country. From the 1990th, all important economic transactions were made on a competitive basis that considerably undermined old influence of France and provided inflow of means to the budget. Distribution of new income was conducted under control of the Commission of Authoritative Citizens in the country that allowed to increase considerably the standard of living of all citizens of the country and strongly raised the popularity of the leader of the country. In 1991, he declared transition to civilian rule and to a multi-party system. The new constitution of the country was adopted on July 12. The first multi-party presidential elections took place in Mauritania in January 1992. Old Taya, as the candidate from created by a Democratic and Social Republican Party, won a victory from 62.7% of voices and was proclaimed by the president. The opposition announced a result of these elections by fraud. At the next presidential elections in December 1997, boycotted by opposition, Old Taya proclaimed himself the winner from 99% of voices. In 1995, diplomatic relations were established, and in 1999 the peace agreement with Israel and a relationship with the Palestine Liberation Organization, which head Yasser Arafat, Old Taya called bandit, is actually frozen. This concluded that caused a discontent storm in the country and the Islamic world. The opposition began to reproach an Old Taya that it was on sale to Zionists. Repressive measures were in reply taken. The opposition was forced to go underground. All rule of an Old Taya, the Islamic fundamentalists connected with Al-Qaeda, were regularly arrested. From the 2001 in the country, Muslim radicals were pursued. At presidential elections in November 2003, Old Taya received 67.0% of votes. In August 2005, Old Taya, who went to a funeral of the King of Saudi Arabia, was overthrown by the Colonel Old Wall. In March 2007, new presidential elections were held. The Sheikh Abdullahi won Old in the second round. In August 2008, the General Old Aziz, the former Chief of Staff of Armed Forces and the Commander of Presidential Guard, dismissed by the President, overthrew Old Sheikh of Abdullahi. In July 2009 the general held elections, after which he became the president of Mauritania. Has received 52% of votes. Islamic Republic. Under the constitution adopted in 1991, the head of state, the president elected by the population for a 5-year term. The parliament is two-chamber. The Senate, 56 places, is elected for the 6-year term. A third of senators has to be updated each 2 years. The National Assembly, 95 deputies, is elected for 5-year term. Last time senators were elected in January 2007. Date of the next elections isn't appointed. Deputies in November 2006. Mauritania is divided into 12 areas and the capital autonomous area Nouakchott. Areas are subdivided into 44 departments. During Mauritian occupation of a part of Western Sahara, 1975-79. The part occupied by Mauritian troops. Approximately corresponded to the lower part of the province of Rio de Oro. Was called Tirasal Garbaya. Nouakchott, the capital of Mauritania. Mauritania occupies the space of 1,030,631 km. On this indicator she is in the 29th place in the world, after Bolivia. From the west Mauritania is washed by the Atlantic Ocean. About 700 km of a shore. More than 60% of the territory of the country occupies stony and sandy deserts of Western Sahara. The climate is tropical desert. There are no constant rivers, except the River Senegal on the southern border of the country. Desert soils. The vegetable cover extremely rare, prevails the grassy vegetation appearing after incidental rains. In the south of the country, the semi-desert with bushes and acacias. Fauna: numerous reptiles and rodents, from predatory jackal, gadgets. In some areas remained large hoofed animals and ostriches. Mauritania is among the most economically underdeveloped countries of the world. DDD per capita in 2018, $41.90. The 131st place in the world. It is lower than the level of poverty, -40% of the population. Unemployment rate -10.30% in 2018. Agriculture -50% working. 12.5% of DDD. Cattle breeding. Sheep, goats, cows, camels. Dates: millet, sorghum, rice, corn. Fishery. The industry -10% working. 47% of DDD. Extraction of iron ore, copper ore, gold, processing of fish. Services industry -40% working, 40.5% of DDD. Export -$2.76 billion. Iron ore -36%. $982 million. Gold -17%. $471 million. Copper ore -8. 3%. $227 million. Frozen fish, mollusks, etc. Seafood up to 28%. The main buyers, China minus 37%. $1.02 billion. Switzerland minus 16%. $451 million. Spain minus 9.1%. $249 million. Italy minus 5.6%. $155 million. And Japan minus 5.3%. $144 million. Import minus $3.51 billion. Products of mechanical engineering, oil products, food, mainly sugar, $170 million. Wheat, $103 million. And palm oil, $83.2 million. Consumer goods. The main suppliers, China minus 24%. $848 million. The USA minus 8.4%. $295 million. The United Arab Emirates minus 6.1%. $213 million. Morocco, $198 million. Minus 5.7%, and France minus 5.1%. $178 million. The Act enters into the International Organization of the Countries. Transportation of the most Massachusetts freight in Mauritania, ores from places of production to seaports, is made by Rail Zurat, Nouadhibou, put into operation in 1963. The main seaports of the country, Nouadhibou and Nouakchott, falls to their share almost all sea goods turnover. National airline, Mauritania Airlines. Demography of Mauritania according to FAO, number is specified in thousands of people. Age and sex pyramid of the population of Mauritania for 2020. Population minus 3.2 million. Assessment for July 2010. Data of censuses about 1977, 2013 given for 2017 are provided. Have expected option. Population on 2017, 3,893,800. Annual gain minus 2.4%. Fertility minus 4.4 births only woman. Average life expectancy minus 58 years at men, 63 years is at women. Contamination, a virus of an immunodeficiency. HIV. Minus 0.8%. Assessment of 2007. Ethno-racial structure. 30% white Berbers. Historically, slaveholders, though many modern Berbers live in poverty. Men usually wear characteristic blue clothes. 40% black Berbers. Historically, slaves. Now about a third half from them are in slavery, the others, descendants of freedmen, occupy an intermediate step between them and blacks who weren't slaves. 30% blacks. Unlike Rabizavani, black Berbers speak the African languages and weren't slaves. Live in the valley of the river Senegal and make the nationalities living in the neighboring state of Senegal. To the Sarakola, a Fulba Wolof Bambara. Languages: the Arab. Official Arab dialect of a Hassanai, languages of black tribes: a Tukular, a Sininka, Wolof, Fula, a Bayman. The religion Islam. Profess nearly 100% of the population. Is available the small Christian community. Literacy -59% of men, 43% of women. On a census of 2000. Mauritania is the last state in the world where the authorities don't pursue slaveholders. Despite official cancellation of slavery at first in July 1980 and then in 2007, de facto about 20% of the population of Mauritania, 600,000 people in 2011, are slaves. The bulk of slaves is the blacks belonging to a ruling class of Berbers. Slaves have no personal, economic and political rights. At the same time, the bin-born children become the property of slaveholders. The state TV company and the public TV channel TATIM. Television de Mauritanie, Television of Mauritania, is created in 1990, the state radio company and the state radio station, Radio National. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.